Growing Up on a Farm in Kentucky. Stories by Stan Schmidt. Episode 12. Encyclopedia Whisky.
My oldest brother, Frank, he got the bright idea that he could make a whiskey still. So we went over to the hardware store where we bought shotgun shells, screws, nails, anything we needed. Then we bought some copper tubing and we coiled it through a old coffee pot my mother had. And that was our, actually we attached it to this where you poured the coffee out. We attached a coffee copper tubing to the end of that where you poured the coffee. And then when we put the liquid mash in the coffee pot and put a fire under it, the alcohol would go out through where you pour the coffee out into the tube, which we ran through the spring water, which condensed the whiskey, and it dripped out the end of the copper tube, and we collected it in a pan. And that's how we had our little still set up by the spring. And it was pretty far from the house, about 500 or 600 yards. And it was downhill. And it took a while for my parents to realize we were making whiskey. They put it in an old whiskey bottle of Dad's, and one time we were drinking it. He's like, "Where'd you get that whiskey? I thought I finished that bottle." And we had to confess that we made it. And so he's like, "That's illegal." And he went down there and just destroyed our still. He was afraid of the revenuers. You could make 300 gallons of wine every year legally, but you couldn't distill whiskey in Kentucky. The home of bourbon, you couldn't make it yourself. It was a disgrace, but our still was destroyed. That was the end of that experiment.
Did it taste good?
I didn't really like the taste that much. I never did. I never have liked bourbon. I always blame it on the fact that when I went to college, I majored in chemistry. One day I walked into this lab where this guy was distilling bourbon from one of the big breweries in Louisville, I guess. Anyways, he was going to isolate the amyl alcohol. There's a little bit of amyl alcohol in the ethyl alcohol. And you can separate them by what's called a spinning band column. The long column, about 4 or 5 feet long. And as the fumes would go up the column, the heavier amyl alcohol would separate from the ethanol. And he was trying to determine how much amyl alcohol was in different batches of whiskey that was brewed by these companies. Because that's what gave you the really bad hangover. At least that was the theory at the time. So when I walked into that lab and I smelled all this amyl alcohol in the air, I was immediately sickened. And that smell I recognized every time I got near any kind of bourbon. I've never liked bourbon because of that. It's just kind of a sickening smell. Once you recognize it, you can recognize it in any whiskey. So that was another lesson I learned about whiskey and how it can make you sick.